Hello and welcome to an Iowa Learning Farms virtual field day on nutrient reducing wetlands. We're real excited to be sharing this field day with you today, and I just want to go over some of the things that we need to do in terms of our housekeeping before we get going. Thank you for all who have attended past virtual field days with us. And we really appreciate all the feedback you've given us, because the more we do these, the more we learn, and hopefully the better we get on these. You know, one of the things about these virtual field days that make them different than a webinar is that taking people out into the field, our speakers, engages them in a way that they might not have done just in front of a screen with some photographs. So it's really good to be utilizing that footage from these events. Today we have some particularly interesting footage of a crep wetland that's just going in, and then we have a really part of a really excellent interview with Dr. Bill Crumpton and Dr. Matt Helmers. And what's neat is this is a much longer interview that you all can watch on YouTube when you want to, but this covers some of the material that's pertinent to this field day. So the Learning Farms was established in 2004. We are building a culture of conservation by working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality, soil health, while remaining profitable. My name is Jacqueline Camino, and I am the director of the Iowa Learning Farms. And along with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, we also have the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, the Conservation Districts of Iowa, the Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, Growmark Inc., Iowa Ag Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and today's field day especially, it's with the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. So just a little reminder of how this works is during the speaker and video presentations, please keep your audio muted as well as your camera muted. And then when you're invited to engage in the dialogue, we actually really encourage you to unmute and to ask questions, or you can type questions into the chat, and Liz Ripley will help sort those out and get those to the speaker so we can move in a nice fluid fashion. But we do encourage discussion and dialogue, so please feel free to just pipe in with some questions. We also will be sending evaluations out to everyone. You'll get an email with that evaluation. I think we're still doing this, but if you get your evaluation back to us, we'll be sending one of these lovely Iowa Learning Farm gaiters that you can wear as masks out there, so that you can be doing the appropriate thing in terms of protecting yourself and protecting others. So get that evaluation filled out. Also a note for those of you who got on early, the music that was playing before comes from a CD that's done by the Water Ox Band. It's called Seasonal Serenades. And if that's something you would also like a copy of, just in your email when you send back the evaluation, let us know and we'll send you a copy of that along with this wonderful Learning Farms gaiter. So we hope that all of you fill out the evaluation when you get it. So just remember that we are building a culture of conservation. So this field day is just the start of the conversation, especially when we're exchanging ideas about nutrient reduction wetlands, because as you're going to hear from our speakers today, how important these are for us to be able to meet some of our goals and to improve our waterways in the state of Iowa, as well as in the whole Mississippi River watershed. So with that covering all of the important things that I needed to cover, I'd like to introduce Susan Kozak. She's IDALS Soil and Conservation and Water Quality Division Director. Hi, Susan, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you, Jackie?
Great. And we've also got Shane Wulf, IDALS Water Resources Bureau Environmental Specialist. Good to see you too, Shane.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I don't know which one of you is starting, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do. I guess you're both going to give some introductory material, and then Liz is going to show a video, right?
Yeah, I think we were just going to introduce ourselves basically, but
okay,
Yeah, some brief remarks. I'm Susan Kozak. As Jackie said, I'm the Director for Soil Conservation and Water Quality with the Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. I've been in this position acting and full-time for over 2 years now, which time has flown by. In my past, I was mostly working with conservation and mine reclamation. So getting up to speed with wetlands and some of the water quality issues that we're working on has been a learning curve for me, but I really enjoy talking about all these things and just the stewardship ethic that we all want to bring to the table in our everyday work and lives. It's very important to me. It's my passion, and so I'm excited to be on here and talk about the wetlands and how we've gone from crop wetlands, our nutrient removal wetlands that we've been doing for many years now, and now we're moving into some different areas too, trying to find other places on the landscape where wetlands will fit. So I hope we have a very productive field day today virtually. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I'm Shane Wulf. I've worked with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship as the Edge of Field Coordinator since September of 2018. And prior to that, I was the Miller Creek Water Quality Improvement Project Coordinator. So it's awesome to see so many familiar names on here. During that time as a coordinator, I worked through, all the conservation practices within the nutrient reduction strategy, and then was fortunate to have been given the opportunity to jump on board with the Department of Agriculture and really kind of focus my efforts on working with folks across the state to put in saturated buffers, bioreactors, other edge of field type of practices, and then wetlands. So excited to be here with you all today, and looking forward to the discussion.
All right, so at this time, I'm gonna share my screen and start the video.
Hello, I'm Dr. Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and the director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. We're fortunate to be out at one of the Iowa Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program wetlands today with Dr. Bill Crumpton that's been working on this technology for a number of years. And these practices are being put in place to help us reduce downstream nitrate delivery, intercepting that tile drainage and water and reducing nitrate delivery. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Glad to be here.
So one of the questions I would have is, these are being put in to help us reduce downstream nitrate delivery. How do they go about removing nitrate?
So the primary process involved in nitrate reduction in these types of wetlands, ones with really heavy non-point source loads, is denitrification. So denitrification is carried out by anaerobic bacteria. The heterotrophic bacteria, they use organic carbon as an energy source. They use nitrate as an electron acceptor rather than oxygen. And they denitrify nitrate to dinitrogen gas, N2 gas. That's 80% of the atmosphere.
So what impacts their overall nitrate removal or the performance of the wetlands? What are some of the factors that influence their performance?
Okay, so the factors the primary factors that affect their average long-term performance is the amount of water that goes into them, so the hydraulic loading rate. That's the volume of water divided by the pool area. The temperature affects their performance. Nitrate concentrations, the higher the concentration, the more mass they remove. Those are the primary factors that we have some control over: hydraulic loading rate, concentration, and temperature. We don't have a lot of control over concentration or temperature, but we do have control over hydraulic loading rate. If we make the wetland larger, hydraulic loading rate will be lower. The wetland will remove a larger percentage of the nitrate that it sees.
So what might we expect as we think about different hydraulic loading rates and the size of the wetland in relation to the watershed? What might we expect for nitrate removal?
So hydraulic loading rate will be related to the pool area and the contributing area to that wetland. And people can relate to that a little better than just hydraulic loading rates, right? So a wetland that was 1% of its contributing area, right? So a catchment was 500 acres, a 5-acre wetland sitting at the bottom of it. That wetland would remove close to 50% on average of the nitrate that it sees.
So these wetlands, at times we'll see some of these wetlands with a lot of emergent or submergent vegetation. Does that vegetation matter as we think about the performance from a nitrate removal standpoint?
For habitat, it matters a lot, but for nitrate removal, the wetlands will function with or without extensive emergent vegetation or submergent vegetation. The vegetation, especially emergent vegetation, greatest influence is it can affect the way water moves through the wetland, right? So if you had really dense stands of emergent vegetation and a channel down the middle that was open, then you'd get a lot of short-circuiting of flows. The vegetation would resist flow. The flow would tend to short-circuit down the middle of the wetland, down the channel. That would reduce performance. On the other hand, if you had uniform emergent vegetation across the wetland and the water was forced to move through it, you could improve performance because bacteria associated with the submerged portions of that vegetation, especially standing dead vegetation, could support denitrification, right?
So does it matter how deep these wetland areas are for nitrate removal?
It matters how deep, but they're designed within a fairly narrow bound, right? So the wetlands have to have at least 75% of the total pool area has to be shallower than 3 feet. You can have deep areas, but they can be no more than 25% of the total pool area, right? So the wetlands are, on average, very shallow. On average, they're about 2 foot deep. The average depth for crepe wetlands is about 2 feet. Then we have areas that are 8 feet deep, but their average depth is 2 feet. So they're predominantly shallow margins with a little bit of deep water toward the middle, right? So there's not a lot of difference in the average depth among the crepe wetlands because of those constraints, right?
So you've been working on the design, monitoring of these types of wetlands for the better part of a couple decades. During that time, has the design of them changed to try to improve their performance from a nitrate reduction standpoint?
Yes, it has, right? So the primary changes have been the use of submerged berms to make sure water didn't short circuit through the wetland. So we make sure all the prior channels in the wetland, those are plugged at intervals, and we have shallow submerged berms to make sure water moves in a fairly efficient manner and it makes good contact with most of the wetland pool. The other change that we've made is in areas where there are more erosive environments, higher energy landscapes, they'll build sediment detention basins upstream of the pool, sort of a forebay. So water flows in, hits a forebay detention pool that might be 10 feet deep, slows down sediment deposits there in that detention basin. It reduces the sediment load to the wetland, which extends the service life. But these wetlands have a really long design life as it is, but that improves it by reducing it further. And then that detention basin can be serviced every 10 or 20 years as needed. It could be dredged out again.
So we talk about nitrate removal. One of the things that I think is very unique about the Iowa CREP program is from the start, there's been a monitoring component associated with this.
Right.
So can you describe kind of how many of these wetlands you might monitor in a year and what you do to quantify their performance from a nitrate perspective?
So we monitor, have monitored over the past decade or more, 10 to 15 wetlands a year. We're shooting for 20 wetlands a year now. And the monitoring is at the inflow. We have automated samplers that collect a sample every 6 hours. Those are composited into a single daily sample. Same thing at the outflow. So close interval monitoring of the inflows and the outflows, plus grab samples every week to supplement that. And then we have flow measurements, continuous flow measurements, either at the outflow structure or in the channel, right? So close interval data on flow, temperature, and close interval samples. From the automated samplers operate from as soon as we're able to get them deployed in the spring after the snow melt is gone, and we operate them until they begin to freeze up, typically now late November, early December.
So you mentioned when the auto samplers are out there, but if I understand correctly, your crew is out there even during those off months in collecting grab samples. And then what are all those samples analyzed for?
Yeah, so samples are collected year-round. The auto samplers only operate when the weather allows, from the spring through late fall. But we collect weekly grab samples at inflows and outflows year-round. The samples are returned to the lab. They're pre-preserved in the field as they're collected. They're returned to the lab. We do a full suite on nitrate and what amounts to total Keldol nitrogen. So we do total nitrogen and nitrate, from which we can calculate the total reduced nitrogen or Keldol nitrogen. And on phosphorus, we analyze total phosphorus and total reactive phosphorus. And we've done that on all sites for the past more than the past decade.
So we've talked a lot about nitrate reduction in these wetlands, but you mentioned that in the monitoring you're also analyzing for phosphorus. Do these systems remove phosphorus, and if so, how effective might they be?
So yeah, the wetlands do reduce phosphorus, but nowhere near the efficiency with which they remove nitrate. Really relates to what the phosphorus concentrations are entering the wetland. If the phosphorus concentrations entering the wetlands are high enough, the wetlands reduce the phosphorus concentrations. If the phosphorus concentrations entering the wetlands were really low, which is unusual, but if they were really low, the wetland can actually serve as a source for phosphorus, at least for a few years, right? Because these were former agricultural lands that were converted to wetland, right? So yes, they do reduce phosphorus, but we can't come close to meeting the nutrient reduction strategy goals for phosphorus using wetlands. I would suggest the same thing is true for every one of the edge of field denitrifying processes, saturated buffers, bioreactors, wetlands. None of those systems reduce phosphorus to any substantial amount.
All right, so I know Shane has some maps he wants to show, and encourage you again to submit your questions via the chat box. And once Shane has shown those maps, we'll encourage you also to then unmute and ask your questions.
All right. Thank you, Liz. Can you all hear me okay? Well, yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to have Iowa State as such an awesome partner. You know, they really help provide us the science with these projects. And, you know, we're tasked with working with landowners and working with partners to get these projects in the ground. And, you know, I just, as kind of some information here, you'll see a lot of little yellow dots, and those are either CREP sites in progress or CREP sites that have been installed. And just a little bit of background, you know, I think it was talked about briefly in the video, but 2002 was when we had our first sign up. And, you know, the CREP program is a partnership between the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and then also USDA. So it's you know, been a successful program, but as you'll see there, the counties in gray, you know, this program is specific to a certain geographic area, and that's along the side of the Des Moines lobe. So there's 37 counties there that are eligible. And again, we've had 89 projects installed to this point. But what's unique about this is there's conservation easements involved. There's annual CRP payments for 15 years involved. And another really neat partnership we have with this program is we work with the Iowa Drainage District Association, where we have wetland field specialists who actually help us with landowner contacts. So that, they'll provide landowners with, conceptual designs, potential payment estimates, and, if the landowners indicate that they are interested, then we have the opportunity to begin the design process. And, it's a longer process when you consider all of the different permitting requirements to the DNR, the Army Corps of Engineers. We typically say to expect about an 18 to 24 month time from start to finish to get these installed. But yeah, I just thought that this map would be helpful to illustrate, where we've been working in the past. And then I know in the next video, we'll touch on a little bit more of the, efforts to bolster the Water Quality Initiative project as well. And the reason being is, you'll see in orange there, we have our priority Huck 8 watersheds that were identified by the Water Resources Coordinating Council as, high priority watersheds within the nutrient reduction strategy. So, some of those are located within the Des Moines lobe, and then you'll notice that, areas like the Middle Cedar, the Turkey, Northeast Iowa, Skunk, South Central, Southeast. There's opportunities to do similar types of projects there too. So that's where in blue you'll see projects either underway or actually ones that have been completed through the Water Quality Initiative. I just thought I would show this as a quick visual to show you where we've been and where we're hoping to continue working here in the future.
All right. So one question that I have for you so far, can these wetlands, it was noted that they're not very deep, but there are areas that are deep. So can they possibly be stocked for fishing or other recreational purposes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things we do have a list of criteria for these wetlands in order to be eligible. One of those requirements is that 75% of the pool or greater has to be 3 foot in depth or less. And as Dr. Crumpton alluded to in the video, there are areas oftentimes right up against the sheet pile structure where there is deeper water. And so theoretically, you could potentially put some fish in there. The question would be if they'd, survive the winter. These are designed for nutrient removal, specifically nitrogen. So, fish habitats, a potential opportunity, but I wouldn't say that it's going to work in every site.
Hey, Shane, this is Jackie, though. Wouldn't you say, though, there are so many other great ecological benefits of these wetlands that, that make it so that if there isn't fishing, there are just so many other services that these wetlands are doing when it comes to wildlife?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's one of the really cool things about wetlands. I saturated buffers and bioreactors are great too. But what I like about wetlands is the sort of ecosystem they recreate. We often get questions of, well, are we just going to create a mosquito pit here? And I don't think that's the case, because what we're doing, you will bring along mosquitoes, but with that, you're going to bring frogs, you're going to bring birds. We have private groups out there like Ducks Unlimited that are really excited about these types of projects for the migration opportunities that these wetland pools provide. It's wildlife is one of the big benefits that gets people excited about these projects.
So sticking with wildlife, had a question for waterfowl hunters. Are they allowed to put on permanent blinds?
Within the conservation easement, which is either a 30-year or a permanent agreement with the local soil and water conservation district, the easements does state that there are no permanent structures are able to be put on within the conservation easement area. However, if there's temporary structures can be brought out there. Otherwise, if you're able to put these types of blinds, or we've even had, I think there's been a couple scenarios where there's small cabins put up just outside the easement boundary. I mean, that's private property that they're welcome to do what they want with. you know, I think there's some ways to work with that, I think. So.
All right, this is another one for Shane. Do you use water level fluctuation as part of your annual management?
Yeah, so my understanding with water level fluctuation, it's within the first year after construction, the water level is typically set about 1 foot below normal pool elevation in order to allow for the establishment of the buffer seating and some of those wetland vegetation that will come in around the pool. And then after that, the wetland is set to its normal pool elevation based on the design. And unless there are major issues out there, as far as I understand it, the water levels are generally left at that, you know, normal pool elevation.
So unlike a saturated buffer or bioreactor where you can go in and adjust gates that would adjust that water level, for wetlands, it's pretty much at the design level.
That's right. And, you know, one of the things with our CREP criteria is, you know, as the engineers put together the design, there cannot be any negative impact to drainage upstream or downstream. So that's definitely something that is taken into consideration to not negatively impact surrounding crop ground or anything like that. And, you know, we make sure to also include a buffer surrounding the pool because there will be a little bit of flashiness during storm events. So it'll be seeded down. And again, that's just a really good, nice opportunity there too for, you know, wildlife benefits. You know, you can consider putting pollinator type species in there and yeah.
So actually, Shane, I just want to throw in there the longer interview with Dr. Crumpton. It goes about 30 minutes. He does get into some of the issues of flooding. And he also gets into, do these absorb carbon and some of those. So Matt actually, Dr. Helmers asked him some of the top questions out there that people might have for these wetlands. So I'd encourage everybody, when you've got the chance, I think that's on YouTube now, to go ahead and watch the whole interview for Dr. Crumpton to understand some of the ways ecologically these are functioning.
So back to water level management, there's a question here about potentially cattails or other invasive species and what impact that they have on stable water levels, if there is any.
You know, I'm not exactly sure on that question, just to be honest with you. You know, I know as part of the general CRP program, spot spraying for invasive species is allowed. And I think that's something that, you know, one of the agreements within the conservation easements is that the landowner will help, you know, with the establishment of the buffer seeding by, you know, mowing the first couple of years, but then also keeping an eye out for, you know, invasive species that may not be desirable. But that's something, you know, we're glad to work with landowners and things like that to make sure the right person is out there to identify whether a you know, particular vegetation is going to be beneficial or not.
So if you have a project area that is outside the priority area, so outside these orange watersheds or outside the CREP, is there a likelihood of still getting funding through WQI programs? Which is actually a great lead into our next video.
Yeah. So the areas in orange and gray there are obviously the program priorities, but we will gladly work with landowners on an individual basis outside that areas to try and identify different programs, including the Water Quality Initiative, Senate File 512. There's EQIP, which Environmental Quality Incentive Program through NRCS, CRP, the CP39. There's numerous programs out there, and we are more than happy to work with folks to try to figure out the best program that fits their conservation goals and try to help offset these construction costs, because we recognize that you know, there's a big upfront you know, expenses here, both within the design and within the construction. So yeah, that's, I know, kind of a longer answer there, but you know, we definitely don't want to just turn anyone away, and, you know, want to try and put as many of these types of projects out there.
which is actually, thank you for that question. It was a great transition because we're going to now share our second video that focuses more on these blue type projects, the WQIs.
Hi, I'm Susan Kozak. I'm the Division Director for Soil Conservation and Water Quality with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. We're out today at a Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP wetland. You can see the construction in the background here. The footprint for the wetland will actually be 16 acres, and it is in the far distance just starting to be built. Right here behind me, they're diverting some of the creek water so that they have a drier environment to do the construction in. The main purpose that we're building wetlands are for the nutrient reduction part of the wetland. We are building many different types of wetlands now, and a lot of times we talk about CREP wetlands specifically, but that's a funding source, a certain program, and it's limited by geography too, to north central Iowa. So one of the things that we're trying to get away from is just talking specifically about CREP wetlands and just talking about wetlands in general. So now that we're just talking about wetlands in general, rather than focusing on specific acronyms and program types, funding sources, we could have a landowner that wants to put a wetland on their property, and they go into their local field office and we'll look at the property and see where does it fit in the landscape. We're working on different types of wetlands now. The CREP wetlands specifically are typically at the end of a tile line or at the end of a watershed where we can capture that water, put it into a wetland and denitrify it before it goes out to a larger stream or creek and moves on down the system. But now we're working on some wetlands where we might interrupt the water in the middle of a tile main or tile line and intercept that water, create a smaller footprint wetland, and then the water out of that wetland would go back into a tile line. So it's not necessarily the end of the system, but more in the middle of the system. And in some locations across Iowa, that makes more sense than to have to fit them all at the end of a watershed. We're also starting to look at some floodplain wetlands where maybe in the landscape it's more of a lower area, a floodplain area, and it makes sense just to manipulate the landscape just a little bit to create a wetland, some detention time, and then it does have that time to denitrify the water and then send it on downstream. So we want to look at the landscape, what the needs are of that landowner, and make sure that we're picking the right one, because now we have many different funding sources to choose from, and we don't have to get all hung up on what the name of the wetland is or the type. The landowners don't really care about that. We just want to see conservation on the ground. So through our water quality initiative, our main focus is that denitrifying or the nutrient removal for the wetlands. But my favorite part of these wetlands is the layers of other benefits that we can add. Habitat being one of those benefits. This one in particular is going to have 5 acres of easement around it where they will have pine trees and other shrubs that will help with that nature and habitat for birds and other pollinators. One of my passions is pollinator and monarch habitat specifically. So adding in milkweed into the seed mixes to make sure that we're attracting monarch butterflies that fly through here each year and are on the decline. So we want to be able to layer the different types of habitat, water quality benefits, flood control, all the different things that these wetlands can be great for, but we get multiple benefits out of one practice. So it's interesting to watch how these wetlands have evolved over time too. When we first started building these 10, 15 years ago, we were probably a little more focused on grasses and other things in that easement boundary around the water pool, and some wetland plants definitely, because you need that for the nitrogen uptake. But we maybe weren't thinking about the habitat benefits as much, but now as we've been talking pollinators the last few, monarch butterflies a lot, we've added a broader diversity of the seed mix that we plant around these in the easement buffer area around the wetlands besides just what is planted in the wetland for the benefits. So for our wetland programs, we have been paying attention to different research projects that go on at these at the wetlands. I know I've seen some trumpeter swan data where the swans come back each year and breed and move around in the wetland areas. I think that's fascinating to see. We've also heard about some research on frogs and different insect counts. So we always are working with partners to see see what the research is that's going on out there, and that helps us add to our story, talk about why these wetlands are so important on the landscape, not just for the water quality, which is our main focus in Division of Soil Conservation, but for the other benefits that these are creating. I think one thing it's important for landowners to think about as they are considering putting a wetland on their property and maybe going into that local field office to talk to them about where it would fit in their landscape is expectations on how long these projects take. Typically, from the first time we talk to a landowner until construction is complete, it can take 12 to 24 months, usually closer to that 2-year time frame. We have to go through lengthy permitting processes, engineering and design, and then construction, and making sure that we have enough contractors out across Iowa to build these properly, that they know what they're doing on the construction sites. And so tempering expectations that they don't happen overnight, but they are wonderful and long-term practices to have on your landscape is an important thing to think about. So as we talk about the nutrient reduction strategy in Iowa, we are trying to increase the pace that we're putting these wetlands out on the ground. In the strategy that was developed several years ago, they have different scenarios of how many wetlands should be out across Iowa to meet some of our nutrient goals. And it's thousands of these wetlands, depending on which scenario you look at. So our goal, our mission in IDALS is to use every little bit of allocation that we get from the state to put conservation practices on the ground, whether that's cover crops, bioreactors, saturated buffers, or wetlands like this. We have a lot that we want to do across the state, and we need landowners to join in and want to put these on their properties. We often hear from landowners that this is one of the best kept secrets in Iowa, is having one of these wetlands or other edge of field practices on their property. They're just wonderful for the habitat and other added benefits that are unexpected past the water quality goals that we're working on. So I encourage you to go to your local field office, talk to them about where this might fit in your property, in your conservation goals, and what you're trying to do with your farm, and then start working with them to get one put in place and constructed on your property. I know you'll enjoy it. And these wetlands are one of the best ways that you can do your part as an Iowan for water quality initiative and our goals that we need to be meeting.
Hello, I'm Hugh Stoll, one of the landowners here on this CREP site. I'm also the habitat chair for our local Pheasants Forever chapter, and that's how I got started in looking at CREP. Passionate about wildlife and looking at programs that would fit here on the farm for wildlife. CREP came to my attention. Not only does it have the benefit of the water quality to meet our water quality initiatives in the state, but it also beautifies the landscape and adds a lot of diversity. Worked with the CREP people. They're super great to work with. They'll listen to your needs, what you want. Was able to get some of the rules changed for the CREP and the buffer seeding area to add some of the bushes and evergreen for the winter cover for wildlife, along with food plots, and that will be on all previous and future CREP sites as I understand it. It's just a great program. They're super easy to work with. It does take a long time. I think we're pushing 3 years to get this CREP site done from the date first contacted, talked to them about it, but the wait is well worth it. I can't wait till it's done. Wildlife is already loving it, and they're just building it now. So I encourage you to get in your FSA office, talk to them, talk to your NRCS people, see what we can do. We need to put some more wetlands on the landscape.
All right. So when it comes to putting out these wetlands, I'm going to direct this one to Susan. What would you say is the biggest limitation for getting these out there at this point? Is it landowner interest? Is it, available contractors? What's some of the biggest challenges that are facing these implementations?
We have a lot of different initiatives going on right now to gain landowner interest. I do think that that's one of the things in the past that's been a limitation, is just making sure that landowners understand why they would want to put this out there, how it would fit on their land. And now I think our bigger conversation is moving outside of those known CREP counties and other areas in the state that we could put these out. So now that's a new learning curve for those landowners to understand the new practice in town that they could put on their land. But I think the other big obstacle is then engineering. So right now we're getting quite a few landowners that are interested. We get to a certain point that we know they're going to fit on their landscape, but we don't have the internal engineering on our staff to be able to do the amount of projects that we have. So we typically contract that out for engineering, and we have a lot of different requests for proposals and things going on right now to increase our engineering capacity. But that's definitely another hurdle, because that engineering can take like a year to get through all of the design considerations and the permitting that they have to do. So it is a time issue there. Probably the other hurdle is contractors. We work with the LICA, the Licensed Contractor Association in Iowa, and we're trying to make sure that people understand how to build these and have plenty of people out there that are interested in getting the contracts to put them on the land. But that can be another hurdle also if you don't have contractors in your area that are familiar with this kind of practice. Lots of challenges.
So Shane, this one probably is something that you've dealt with. Because there is a case where wetlands can span 2 or more properties. How do you go about working with different landowners when the site that's best maybe crosses property lines?
Yeah. Well, so in that situation, communication really is key. That is, I'd say, one of the challenges is you just have so many different folks involved with these projects. You know, let's just use CREP as an example. You have, you're working with the Farm Service Agency, you have Army Corps of Engineering permitting, you work with DNR, there may be a floodplain development permit, there may be a county floodplain development permit, and then yeah, when you get to multiple landowners, then there are things that you know, they need to be in agreement with. One of those being the I had mentioned earlier, I think that there are a couple of different options for length on the conservation easements. One of them is 30-year option, and then the other would be perpetual. So that would be an example where we need to make sure that there's an understanding and an agreement between those neighbors, that, you know, they understand the maintenance requirements in regards to the seeding. They agree upon the length of the contract. Yeah, I mean, and you definitely want people, you know, understanding and committed to these projects, because they are, you know, pretty intensive. There's a lot that goes into them. So that does present challenges, but we just did a project up in Buena Vista County that I believe it involved initially 5 landowners, and so it can be done. It does add a little bit of complexity to the project.
So this one builds off what Susan, you mentioned working with groups like LICA or other organizations. There's a question here of how can engineers be a part of the group that's contacted for these projects? How do you get your name on that list?
Sure. In the past, we've had a list of engineers that we knew that were interested, and we're actually updating that process right now, and we're going to put out a solicitation for qualified engineers. So that'll be a public announcement. We'll advertise that through engineering associations also. So we'll try and get that word out as wide as we can. And then any engineering firm that is qualified can put in and get on the list. And then every time we would have a request for a proposal for design, then they would get notified about those. If you are concerned that you may miss the solicitation call, then just send us an email and we'll make sure that you get contacted when that process comes out. Within the next month, I would say we're going to put that call out for qualified engineers again, just to make sure that we have a most up-to-date list.
So at this point, are there any wetland design options that you're looking at that would help improve phosphorus mitigation, or is that more of like a soil retention basin?
Yeah, I think when we talk about phosphorus and I look at the nutrient reduction strategy, those practices typically fit more in our traditional conservation of terraces and some of the management practices up on the landscape. So cover crops are really good for phosphorus. We like to talk about having many tools in the toolbox, and wetlands just doesn't happen to be the best tool for phosphorus. It's one of the best tools that we have for nitrogen removal, but if our goal for a landowner is phosphorus, then I would probably recommend a different practice. Shane, I don't know if you have any other opinions on that.
I know, I don't have much to add. I agree with what you're saying. Yep.
And I think one of the keys to keep in mind here is how these two nutrients move. And so that's also why there's practices that work better for treating nitrogen that maybe aren't, suitable for treating phosphorus and vice versa.
Yeah, typically that phosphorus is connected to the soil particle itself. So if you stop those particles, the erosion, by putting cover crops on where you're holding the soil in place or putting a terrace up to prevent some of that erosion coming down, then that's why you're more effective with phosphorus with those, where nitrogen typically is in the actual water. And so a wetland is going to be one of the best things you can do for detaining that water and being able to treat it. But yeah, I think one thing we can't forget too is just because you put a wetland on doesn't mean that that's all you have to do. We would love to see these practices put in combination on every farm. We want to see people doing cover crops, no-till, put a wetland in, put terraces on, whatever fits in your landscape. And that's why it's really hard to say exactly what a person should do without seeing their exact situation, because something that fits in Northwest Iowa is not going to be the right fit for Southeast Iowa. And, all the landscapes and everybody's goals are so different. We have to have many different practices that we combine together to be the right thing for that person.
Yeah, hey Susan, I want to throw in again just to promote that longer video with Dr. Bill Crumpton. At the end of that video, Matt and Bill go into a really interesting conversation about our conservation learning lab project, where we did exactly that. We took 2 small delivery scale watersheds and we put them in 50% or more cover crops, and also increased the amount of strip till or no-till in those watersheds. And so Bill and Matt actually discuss that data and discuss some of the implications and some of the ins and outs. So I want to really encourage everybody to really, especially check out the last like 7 or 8 minutes of that video, and they can hear a really, really detailed conversation of that. So that's one of the things that Dr. Crumpton brings up, is how much value added that you all have gotten off of these CREP wetlands, particularly the monitoring program. There's numerous research projects that have emerged out of the fact that you are monitoring them, right? Correct? And you mentioned some on your video too.
Yeah, I think that there's all kinds of monitoring and other research projects that we're probably not even aware of that are going on with the wetlands. And I think that's exciting, because then that data eventually filters back to us and can help inform some of our decisions on how do we make changes potentially on these wetlands.
Can I throw out there might just be one more barrier to getting these wetlands out there?
Yeah.
This is going to be a pitch for something else you all are funding as a cool project, is just public opinion and understanding of the value and importance of these wetlands. And so you all have funded a wetland conservation station that it was supposed to be going out here in the fall, but COVID slowed it all down. And so hopefully next summer we'll be traveling around the state with the wetland conservation station. So I think public education and really them understanding the value of these wetlands.
Yeah, I think that that's one thing that we're continually working on, and we've actually been trying to increase some of our social media posts of the importance of water quality projects. We have some radio ads coming out next week that'll be targeted more at cover crops and statewide signups of some conservation practices. But yes, I think outreach is one of our important missions right now, so that people understand the big goals that we have for the state of Iowa and how everybody can do something to help.
So I've got a couple questions that came in directed, I think, primarily at the design of the wetlands. Is there a way that, and then maybe either one of you are aware of lower tech wetland designs, so maybe a little quicker on the engineering front, that'll help you meet your goal of getting thousands of these across the state?
I think one of the reasons we've been looking at some of the other types of wetlands, like I explained in the video, the ones where we intercept the tile line in the middle rather than at the end, and so maybe it's a smaller footprint. We're starting to look at many different ideas like that, trying to find ways to make these quicker to get on the landscape or easier for design. Can we get them, it drives engineers crazy, but I like to say like a cookie cutter design, which you have to put all the hydraulics and the water information in. So it can't be cookie cutter, it has to be site specific, but is there a way that we can get some data and inform these so that it is a little bit easier on engineering? We are working on that. Shane, do you have something that you wanted to add on that one?
No, I think, as we have, we continue to get more experience and get more engineers involved. They're, becoming more and more comfortable with these types of projects too. So I think that's a big part of it. We've experienced that with, saturated buffers and bioreactors as we're working to scale that up too. So I think like anything else, the more experience we all get with this, the little bit more streamlined, hopefully it'll become.
So there was a question about if it's at all possible to build a hybrid wetland that offers both flood storage and nitrate removal. Do you have any of those in the works or aware of?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it in my notes, but I know that we do have at least one that's in design right now. Shane, you might know which one it is, but it has both flood retention goals and water quality benefits. And that's something that we're hoping to explore further and have more of those kind of flood retention benefits also with our wetlands. So yes, we're exploring that.
What factors would you look for, or features in a floodplain that would be suitable for a wetland if someone has a floodplain land area?
Yeah, so we're just starting to work on some floodplain sites. We had one in Hardin County that was installed, and basically we're just looking for low areas where we have the opportunity to intercept the drainage coming into it. And in this situation, we use this basically a riffle structure to divert water over to a low area where it's really all going to be based on the existing contours out there. Nice flat area where you're able to use a very small berm to contain the pool prior to dumping back into the creek. And so it's a pretty neat project. I'm honestly still learning a lot on those. And I think I could probably speak for us that we all are, but that's just another tool in the toolbox. So if you think you have a site in mind, and please do not hesitate to send it on, and we're glad to take a look.
And as Shane was talking, another project that popped into my head was under our urban program, actually, and it's here in Des Moines. And so it's a little different focus area rather than in the rural landscape. This one's an urban one, but I don't know a lot of the details, but it was a big hill with houses and all this water running down, and then they put a wetland down in the floodplain, and the water meanders around, it slows down, it retains it there a little bit, and then it goes on to the creek. And so we're looking at smaller areas too. This was a very small footprint, urban wetland, but very effective for helping slow that water down in an urban landscape.
And that was actually something similar as what we highlighted in our last virtual field day in Iowa City near Big Grove. They put in an oxbow in a park there. So you can check that video out as well for an urban aspect of it. So speaking of, said it was a small footprint. Is there a minimum size for a wetland to be effective? I don't know, Shane, if you have like a minimum for your programs or.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's a minimum size to be effective, but there's a minimum size to have a good value for the dollars that go into the engineering construction costs. Typically what we've been looking for within the water quality initiative projects is a minimum drainage area of around 100 acres. Particularly in those cases where we talked a little bit about the tile zone wetlands, where we have, we're maybe intercepting a main higher in the watershed. What's nice about those is that we actually can utilize the existing prairie pothole depressions out there. So there's less earthwork involved with those type of projects. So I think in those cases in particular, it may make more sense and be more justified as worth the dollars. And it's really going to be kind of on a site-by-site basis.
And this is a clarification question. The projects that you indicated on that map are designed to be fed by tile drainage. Is that correct?
Correct.
So are you working on other wetlands in non-tile drain landscapes as well?
So, you know, these projects are that I've been working with have, you know, are primarily nitrogen reducing wetlands. And so we're seeing that the best opportunity is to intercept those tile lines. And so I don't know, if, Susan, if you have anything more to add, but that's kind of been the program priority.
No, when we're talking nutrient removal wetlands, the big key is typically intercepting that tile drainage, because that's where the water is flowing with the nitrates typically.
All right, so I'll give folks just a few more minutes to type in questions. And in the meantime, just want to share with you, for those that are interested in CCA credits, I'll also add this to the chat. Email me, that's my email there, by 5 o'clock today. Sorry, date's wrong there. It should be 5 o'clock today, with your full name, the name you entered to watch the webinar or today's virtual field day, and then your CCA number. And then if you can plan to join us in a couple weeks, we're going to be hosting a no-till as a moisture management tool virtual field day on Tuesday, August 25th. So that's a different day of the week, but the same time, same link. So we hope you can join us then.
Liz, do we have any more questions?
I have not had any more come in during that.
Okay, so I think we'll just wrap it up here. Shane, Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. This is actually really exciting. We got up to about almost 70 people, and we only lost 6. So that tells you how engaged everybody was in your conversation, because usually they watch the videos and first of it, and then we start dropping off a little bit. So clearly people are interested. I think we should continue to do more of these events as we try to get more and more information. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any final comments you want to leave people with?
Now, this is just a great opportunity for us to talk about all the work that we're trying to do, and we're putting a lot of moves in place so that we can scale this up. So this is very helpful for us to get that information out. We appreciate this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I had
Yeah,
one question. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you there. They're asking about evaluation to get the mask. There's a question at the end of the evaluation. It's an online survey. Provide us with your mailing address and we'll mail it to you free of charge. So
Okay, so Shane, you want to add a last comment?
Oh, no, you know, this is great. This is awesome that we have this, you know, platform to be able to do this. I know I've sat in on a couple of virtual field days where it was absolutely beautiful outside. And it's like, oh, I wish, you know, we were there in person. But right now, anyway, we're getting some much needed rain. So it's really cool to be able to do this still, even, you know, when weather might not have cooperated if we were, you know, out on site or something like that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this. And it's also the beauty that we're able to get people from all over the state together in a dialogue. So that's the difference. Anyway, all right. So that's going to end it. So people.
Last thing,
Oh,
Keegan
what?
Colt asked, Shane, you're supposed to plug your shirt. Is that a ray gun special there?
Oh, this is the most appropriately named. Yeah, it's kind. I know it's showing backward, but yeah, wetlands are the most appropriately named conservation practice. So
Nice.
Love it. And I will say these the face covering things from Learning Farms, they're pretty nice. So do your evaluation and get one. I like it.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you.